The whole family went last week. Those words sliced through me like a knife. I had just asked casually about the vacation I had spent months paying for. The trip I thought we'd all take together. My mother didn't even look up from her coffee when she said it. She stirred in slow circles, her tone so flat it was almost cruel. I blinked, waiting for the joke. Waiting for her to laugh and say, "Of course you're coming too." But the silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. My father cleared his throat, shuffling papers on the table, refusing to meet my eyes. My sister scrolled through her phone like I didn't exist. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. I had worked double shifts to cover that trip. I had drained my savings, skipping meals and nights out, telling myself it was worth it because family mattered. Family. That word suddenly tasted bitter on my tongue. I finally found my voice. "Wait, you went? Without me?" My sister's lips curled into a smirk. "We didn't think you'd mind. You're always so, busy. Busy, that's what they called it." The endless hours of work, the sacrifices, the quiet ways I kept the lights on when bills piled high. Busy. My chest tightened, heat rising into my face. "I paid for it," I whispered. The words cracked, but I forced them out louder. Every single dollar. That money was mine. For the first time, my father looked up. His expression was sharp, dismissive. "Don't raise your voice. It was a family trip. Family means sharing. Sharing..." My laugh came out hollow, broken. "Sharing would have been me there with you. Not sitting here, finding out after the fact like I don't matter." The room was still. Too still. My mother placed her spoon down with a quiet clink. "Melissa, don't make a scene. What's done is done." My hands trembled on the edge of the table. I wanted to scream, to flip the whole thing over, to demand they explain how they could smile in vacation photos, eat meals I'd paid for, sleep in hotel rooms booked with my money, all while leaving me behind, but I saw it in their faces. The indifference, the quiet satisfaction. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. I pushed back my chair. The scrape of wood against tile echoed like thunder. "You've made your point," I said, my voice low. "I'm not part of this family." "I'm just the wallet," my sister snorted, tapping her phone. "If the shoe fits..." Her words stung worse than the slap she'd once given me. I grabbed my bag, my fingers fumbling against the strap. My cousin Lily sat frozen at the end of the table, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. For a second, I thought she might speak. Defend me. But like always, no one did. I walked to the door, each step heavier than the last. My breath came fast, ragged. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst out of my chest. Behind me, my father muttered, "Ungrateful." Just one word, sharp and final, ungrateful. The irony almost made me laugh. I had given them everything. My money, my time, my effort, and in return they gave me silence, exclusion, betrayal. I opened the door. The afternoon light hit me like a slap, bright, unforgiving. I stepped out, the air colder than it should have been, sharp against my skin. For a moment, I stood there on the porch, my bag slipping off my shoulder, my knees weak. Memories flooded me. All the times I'd been pushed aside, mocked, forgotten. This wasn't new. It was just louder. I glanced back once. Through the window, I saw them, my parents, my sister, sitting together like nothing had happened. Like I was already erased, something inside me hardened. I whispered to myself, so quietly they couldn't hear, this was never about the vacation. It was about finally seeing the truth. And as I walked down the street, leaving their house behind, I realized I wasn't just walking away from a trip. I was walking away from years of being invisible. That day, the betrayal cut deep. But in the silence that followed, one thought grew stronger than the pain. I wasn't just leaving them. I was leaving my old self behind. The first sting of betrayal didn't come from a slap. It came in the quiet ways my parents drew invisible lines, placing me on one side and my sister on the other. I was 8 years old the first time I noticed it. My small hands gripped a broom almost taller than me as I swept crumbs from the kitchen floor. The scent of roasted chicken filled the house, the sound of my sister's laughter echoing from the living room. She lounged on the couch, legs swinging, cartoons blaring on the TV. "Melissa, hurry up with those floors!" My mother barked from the stove. I froze, hoping she'd call Claire next, hoping fairness might exist. But instead, her voice softened as she turned toward the couch. "Claire, sweetheart, want some cocoa?" Cocoa for her, chores for me. That was the rhythm of my childhood. At first, I thought if I worked harder, if I obeyed without complaint, maybe they'd notice. Maybe they'd see me, but every time I scrubbed, polished, or fetched, all it earned me was another order. Meanwhile, Claire basked in attention, her smile always met with warmth, mine with impatience. The memory that never left me came one Thanksgiving. The house buzzed with chatter. Aunts, uncles, cousins filled the long wooden table. Claire sat in the center, her curls perfect, her dress shining under the light. I carried in a tray of dishes so heavy my arms trembled. Claire's voice rang out sweet as honey, but sharp as glass. "Careful, Melissa. Don't drop it like last time." The room erupted in laughter. Real cruel laughter. My cheeks burned. My throat closed up. The tray wobbled in my hands and a glass toppled, spilling juice across the tablecloth. Gasps filled the room. My mother's glare cut through me. "Melissa, why can't you be more careful?" And then the dagger. Claire's giggle, high and triumphant. "She's just clumsy. Always has been." I scanned the faces around me, searching desperately for someone to defend me. An aunt, a cousin, even my father. But all I saw were smirks, shaking heads, or worse, indifference. That night, I buried my face in my pillow, muffling sobs I didn't want anyone to hear. The laughter still echoed in my ears. The humiliation seared into my skin. I whispered into the dark. Why only me? The walls gave no answer, and in their silence, a seed of unfairness lodged itself deep in my chest. A seed that would grow year after year, watered by every cruel laugh, every careless dismissal, until it bloomed into something I could no longer ignore. By the time I reached my teenage years, the seed of unfairness had grown roots. It shaped the way I walked through the world, always braced for dismissal, always ready to be overlooked. While Claire floated through high school in a haze of soccer games and weekend parties, I spent my evenings bagging groceries at the corner store. My paychecks were small, but they meant I could buy my own notebooks, my own clothes, even my own secondhand phone. Independence was my shield, even if it came with exhaustion. Report cards became another battleground. I'd bring home A's, my heart swelling with quiet pride, only to watch them skim the pages with disinterest. "That's nice, Melissa," my father would mutter, eyes already shifting toward Claire. But Claire just won another medal. Now that's something to celebrate. Every word chipped away at me. Nothing I did was ever enough, not compared to her. And then came Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue. Family gatherings were her stage, and I was her favorite target. One Sunday afternoon, with cousins crowded in the living room, she leaned back in her chair, her gaze sweeping over me. "Melissa, still working at that little shop? When will you do something important?" The words hung heavy in the air. I forced a smile, my palms slick. "I'm saving for college." Her laugh was sharp, dismissive. "College? Sweetheart, not everyone's cut out for success. Some people are meant to support others." Her eyes flicked to Claire, who preened under the praise. The room chuckled with her. I wanted to disappear, to shrink so small no one could see me. Instead, I sat frozen, my face burning, my chest hollow. That night, I opened a blank notebook and stared at the empty pages. My hands shook as I gripped the pen. Slowly, I began to write. I wrote about every chore, every insult. Every time my parents looked through me, I wrote about Claire's smirk, Margaret's condescension, my mother's cold eyes. I poured my hurt into the pages, each word proof that I existed. Every sentence was a scream I couldn't release. Every page was evidence of the life no one else cared to see. I didn't know it then, but those journals would become my only safe place, the shield and the sword I'd carry into adulthood. And as I pressed the pen harder against the page, one thought repeated like a drumbeat in my chest. One day, they'll regret this. Adulthood wasn't freedom. It was just a heavier version of the same chains. By 21, my paychecks no longer belonged to me. Every week I slipped folded bills onto the kitchen counter, groceries, electricity, mortgage, quiet offerings to keep the house running. No one thanked me, not once. My parents treated it like my duty, as though my existence alone required payment. Meanwhile, Claire floated through her 20s like money grew on trees. Shopping bags dangled from her wrists, her weekends blurred with bars, trips, and emergencies that my parents always covered. "She just needs a little support," my mother would sigh, handing her another stack of cash. When I contributed, they said nothing. When she asked, they opened their wallets. That was the rhythm of our home. The memory that still makes my stomach tighten came during my father's birthday dinner. The dining room buzzed with laughter, plates stacked high with food I'd helped pay for. Relatives gathered around, glasses clinking. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my chest heavy but silent. Then Claire raised her glass, her smile wicked. "Here's to Melissa," she said, her voice carrying across the room. The bank of the family. Honestly, where would we be without her wallet? Laughter erupted, real, sharp, merciless. Aunts chuckled, cousins smirked, even my parents grinned as though it were a harmless joke. But I felt it like a slap, hotter and sharper than any physical blow. My cheeks burned. My throat closed. I stared down at my plate, fighting back the tears pressing behind my eyes. I wanted to scream, "I'm not a wallet. I'm not just a bank." But the words caught in my throat, strangled by years of silence. Instead, I raised my glass slowly, my voice quiet but steady. "One day," I whispered, too low for anyone but myself to hear, "I won't be your wallet." The words were small, swallowed by laughter and clinking glasses. But inside me, they burned like fire. The cracks widened after that birthday dinner. Their laughter still echoed in my ears when the breaking point finally came. It was late one evening. I walked into the living room, tired from another long shift, grease still clinging to my clothes. My parents sat together, faces unusually serious, while Claire sprawled across the couch with a soda in hand. "Melissa," my father began, "we need your help again with some family expenses." I nodded cautiously. "Okay, I can cover part of it." But before I could even breathe relief, my mother's voice cut in, sharp as a knife. "And you should be grateful you even live here. Do you think you could survive without us?" Grateful. That word hit harder than the request itself. Grateful for what? Paying their bills in silence? Keeping this house afloat while Claire sipped sodas and smirked? My chest tightened. Claire leaned back, her grin curling wider. "Honestly, Melissa, you should be glad you have a roof over your head. Not everyone's that lucky." Her tone dripped mockery. My jaw locked, my fists clenched. For a moment, I thought I'd choke on my rage. Finally, I stood, my voice trembling but fierce. "Grateful? For what? Being treated like a servant? For paying for a house where I don't even feel wanted?" The room went still. My parents stiffened, eyes flashing with anger. But Claire only smirked deeper, like she'd been waiting for this. "You'll regret this," I spat, every word fueled by years of humiliation. I grabbed my bag, storming out of the house. The slam of the front door rattled the windows behind me. The night air was sharp and cold, but I welcomed it. Each step I took down the street felt heavier, yet freer. My breath came fast, my chest aching, but my thoughts were clear for the first time. If they were going to call me ungrateful, if they were going to laugh at me, mock me, reduce me to nothing more than a wallet, then I would gather proof. That night, I pulled out an old shoebox and began filling it. Receipts from groceries, electric bills, doctor's visits, every dollar I'd ever spent to keep their lives afloat. Next came my journal. I started recording every insult, every remark, every dismissal. Their cruelty wouldn't vanish into thin air anymore. Each page, each slip of paper was evidence. Evidence they couldn't erase or laugh off. As I tucked the first stack of receipts into the box, I whispered again, steady this time, "You'll regret this." And for the first time, I believed it. The apartment was barely larger than a shoebox, but it was mine. Peeling paint on the walls, a leaky faucet that dripped no matter how tight I turned the handle, and a mattress shoved against the corner. It wasn't glamorous. Still, for the first time in my life, I had space no one else could claim. I worked brutal hours to keep it. Mornings at the diner waiting tables, afternoons delivering groceries, evenings washing dishes until my fingers cracked. My uniform always smelled like grease, and my feet ached so badly that sometimes I collapsed onto the mattress without even taking off my shoes. No one called me lazy. No one demanded my paycheck. No one sneered when I came home exhausted. But the silence cut deeper than I expected. Nights were the worst. I'd sit by the single window, staring at the dim streetlights below, my body sore and my chest hollow. The absence of voices, the same ones that once mocked me, somehow weighed heavier than their insults. One evening, I stumbled into the bathroom after another 16-hour shift. My reflection stared back at me in the cracked mirror. Pale skin, dark circles bruising my eyes, hair limp from neglect. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel tired. I felt broken. The tears came fast, hot, unstoppable. I gripped the sink, shoulders shaking, sobs echoing in the tiny tiled space. Years of silence, humiliation, sacrifice, all of it poured out until my body trembled. I lifted my eyes back to the mirror, forcing myself to stare into my own reflection. My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. I don't need them to survive. The words startled me. They cut through the sobs like a blade, grounding me. I repeated them again, firmer this time. I don't need them to survive. It wasn't just a line, it was a promise. The loneliness didn't vanish. But something shifted that night. I stopped waiting for validation. I stopped expecting gratitude. Instead, I started focusing on survival. Slowly, I carved out pieces of independence. Between shifts, I took on small freelance gigs, coding projects for local businesses, fixing laptops, designing simple websites. The pay was nothing compared to the hours, but it was mine. Work no one could claim, no one could dismiss. I kept quiet about it. No updates to family, no desperate pleas for recognition. Just small victories stacked one on top of another. And though the mirror still showed exhaustion, the eyes staring back at me were different, stronger, sharper. That night, as I closed my laptop after submitting my first paid freelance project, I whispered one more promise. They'll never see me crawl again. It didn't take long for gossip to find me. Families like mine thrived on whispers, and no matter how far I tried to distance myself, the news always found its way in. Claire, the golden child, the star, the one I was always told to envy, wasn't so golden anymore. Her marriage, the one my parents paraded as proof of her success, had started to crumble. Neighbors whispered about screaming matches, slammed doors, police sirens flashing outside her house at midnight. Her finances were just as fragile. The credit cards she had swiped so freely had finally caught up with her. Bills piled high, collection notices stuffed into her mailbox. A friend at the bank let slip that Claire was weeks behind on payments, her name flagged by creditors. And yet, my parents refused to see it. She's just going through a rough patch, my mother insisted. She'll bounce back, my father added. The same words they had never once said for me. For the first time, I didn't feel envy. I felt vindication. The world was finally catching up to Claire, and I hadn't lifted a finger. But instead of gloating, I started paying attention, listening, watching, documenting. I pulled out my journal, the same one filled with years of insults, dismissals, and humiliations, and began adding new entries. Gossip about Claire's debt, notes about the fights spilling into the street, even screenshots from her social media posts where her captions grew more desperate, her smiles forced. Neighbors muttered that she was drowning. Relatives whispered that the perfect image was cracking. A friend of mine who worked at a mortgage office slipped me a note about missed payments. Every fragment mattered. Piece by piece, I built a quiet arsenal. Not of weapons, but of truth. My parents, blinded by favoritism, kept propping her up. But I knew better. I'd lived in her shadow too long to miss the cracks. Each time I wrote something down, I thought of the nights I had cried into my pillow, begging for someone to see me. Now, finally, it wasn't me falling apart. It was her. And this time, I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing. I closed my journal one night, the ink still wet on the last line. My reflection glimmered faintly in the dark window. The city lights flickered like distant stars. They won't see me coming, I whispered. And for the first time, the thought didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a plan. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. My mother's voice, syrupy sweet in a way I hadn't heard since childhood, drifted through the receiver. "We've been thinking about you. Why don't you come over for dinner? It's time to put the past behind us." The words almost made me laugh. These were the same people who told me I wasn't family anymore when I walked out. But now suddenly they missed me. I agreed. Not because I believed them, but because I was curious. When I walked into their home, nothing had changed. Same heavy curtains, same stale air, same portraits of my siblings smiling on every wall. But the moment I stepped through the door, my mother rushed forward with open arms. "Oh, sweetheart, we've missed you so much." I let her hug me, my arms stiff at my sides. Inside, my thoughts were sharp and bitter. Missed me? Or missed my wallet? My father clapped my shoulder like he hadn't spent years cutting me down. "It's good to have you home again." I smiled faintly, thinking, good to have me or good to have my money. Dinner was a performance. My sibling Claire bragged about meaningless things, her new shoes, her upcoming spa day, while ignoring the cracks in her life. My parents nodded along, throwing her the spotlight as always. But then, carefully, the topic shifted. "You know," my father began, carving his steak with deliberate slowness, "times are tough lately. Bills keep piling up. And Claire has been under so much stress with the kids. We could use a little help. There it was. The real reason? I sipped my water slowly, biting back a smile. On the outside, I nodded sympathetically, like their little speech touched me. On the inside, my sarcasm burned hot. Of course. The forgiveness tour wasn't about love. It was about cash. Claire leaned in with that smug grin I knew too well. You've always been so responsible. I don't know what we'd do without you. My inner voice dripped venom. Oh, you'd manage. You'd just blame me louder while sinking faster. I kept my tone calm, polite even, masking my thoughts. I'll see what I can do. The relief on their faces was almost insulting. They thought they had me exactly where they wanted me. But what they didn't know was that I was no longer the broken child they remembered. I had my own apartment, my own income, my own strength. I wasn't desperate for their approval anymore. That night, I went home and opened my journal, writing every word, every false smile, every manipulative line. I wrote with a steady hand, my sarcasm spilling into the margins like venom. Forgiveness? No, this was hunger. And they still thought I was weak enough to feed them. They didn't realize I was already planning for the day they would choke on their own lies. The whispers started small. A neighbor at the grocery store, lowering her voice as she leaned closer. Did you hear about Michael? Michael, Claire's perfect husband, the man my parents praised like royalty, was drowning. His business had collapsed, debts stacked higher than their spotless family portraits. Creditors called day and night. Bank notices piled up like a storm no one could stop. I listened, silent, while the neighbor shook her head. Poor Claire. Poor Michael. But not everyone is surprised. I wasn't surprised either. For years, I'd been told Claire was the successful one, the pride of the family. My achievements were brushed aside, my hard work dismissed as ordinary, and now, when real responsibility came crashing down, their golden child had nothing to show but unpaid bills and empty promises. At the next family gathering, the truth hovered like smoke in the air. My parents smiled too brightly, their voices too cheerful, trying to hide the cracks. Claire's just having a small setback, my mother chirped, passing the bread basket. She'll bounce back in no time. I studied Claire across the table. Her eyes were tired, her smile brittle, her fingers trembling slightly as she poured herself a glass of wine. Michael wasn't even there. Rumor had it he was meeting with creditors, trying to buy time he didn't have. But even as the walls caved in, my parents clung to their story. She's the successful one, my father said firmly, stabbing his fork into his plate. Always has been. Always will be. The irony nearly made me laugh. I remembered every insult they'd thrown at me, every time they told me I wasn't enough, that I was lucky just to be in the same room as Claire. And now, when the family needed saving, their shining star had nothing to give. For a long time, I stayed silent, savoring the bitter sweetness of it all. But as the evening dragged on, something hardened in me. I thought of my receipts, my journals, my growing collection of proof. Years of humiliation documented in ink. Years of their lies waiting to be exposed. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. When my mother leaned toward me with that same rehearsed smile, maybe you can help your sister through this rough patch, I felt something snap. Enough, I had played the quiet role long enough. I had swallowed my pain in silence, built my strength in the shadows. But silence had served its purpose. Now it was time to speak. I excused myself from the table, my voice calm, even gentle. But inside, I knew. The next time I opened my mouth, they would never forget what I had to say. The night of Claire and Michael's anniversary dinner arrived like a storm I had been waiting years to face. The venue was polished marble floors and chandeliers, the kind of setting my parents adored because it screamed status. I walked in calmly, my heart steady, because this time, I wasn't there to play their script. The room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and shallow compliments. My parents beamed at the entrance, ushering guests toward the buffet. Claire glided through the crowd in a glittering dress, every inch pretending her life wasn't falling apart. Michael stood stiff beside her, smiling too wide, like a man hoping no one smelled the smoke of his burning world. I stayed near the edge of the crowd, observing. Tonight wasn't about blending in. Tonight was about timing. Halfway through the evening, a hush fell when a distinguished guest entered. Mr. Harris, the CEO of a major company and a longtime family friend. He was respected, admired, and, more importantly, trusted. the kind of man whose word carried weight. My parents hurried to greet him, pride dripping from every step. "Mr. Harris, we're so honored you could make it," my father said, puffing his chest. Claire positioned herself beside him, her hand on his arm as if she already owned the spotlight. But then Harris scanned the room, his eyes landing on me. His face lit up. "Ah, there you are," he said warmly, bypassing Claire entirely. The crowd shifted, confused. Claire's painted smile froze. My mother blinked. My father's hand dropped awkwardly. Harris walked straight to me, shaking my hand firmly. "This is the one I trust. Dependable, hardworking, and sharp. I've seen your dedication firsthand." Gasps rippled through the hall. A few guests whispered, their eyes darting between me and Claire. My sibling's face crumbled, the glow of her spotlight dimming in an instant. Claire tried to recover, her voice too high-pitched. "Oh, Mr. Harris, you must be mistaken." But Harris cut her off with a chuckle. "No mistake. I know exactly who I'm talking about." His gaze settled on me again, his words deliberate. "In a world full of talkers, you've proven yourself a doer. That's why people respect you." The silence that followed was heavy, delicious. I didn't gloat, not yet. I simply smiled, shaking his hand again, though inside my chest burned with vindication. Years of invisibility, dismissed achievements, and open humiliation, all of it cracked apart in that single moment. Claire stood frozen, her lips parted but no sound coming out. My parents shifted uncomfortably, plastering smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The guests returned to their conversations, but the air had changed. The story of the night had already been written, and for once, I wasn't the punchline. I was the headline. As the evening wore on, Claire's laughter grew brittle, her glass of wine never leaving her hand. My parents forced their cheerfulness, but I could see it, the cracks spreading like shattered glass. And I, for the first time, felt entirely in control. The night ended with Harris clapping my shoulder once more. "Keep at it. People like you are the future." His voice carried, meant to be heard, and Claire, she couldn't hide her face. The mask had slipped, and everyone saw the cracks. Chaos never waits politely. It erupted before dessert was even served. Claire's voice, sharp and venomous, sliced through the hum of chatter. "This is ridiculous. He doesn't know you the way he knows me. You've always been—" "Nothing!" Gasps circled the room again. Guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending to sip their drinks while hanging on every word. I stayed calm, my glass of water steady in my hand. "Nothing?" I repeated softly, my tone even. "Funny, because I've kept everything." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" My parents rushed in, their voices trembling with forced authority. "That's enough," my father barked. "Don't create a scene." Claire's reputation? But I interrupted, pulling a small folder from my bag. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I had waited too long to let nerves ruin this. "Reputation? Let's talk about that." I spread the receipts across the table, each one marked, dated, logged. Bank transfers, payments, rent money. Bills I covered while being called selfish, ungrateful, and ordinary. "Every insult you threw at me," I said, my eyes sweeping over them. I wrote down. Every demand for money I kept. Every word you used to make me small. I kept it all. The room had gone silent. Forks froze midway to mouths. Guests who barely knew me leaned closer, as though my words carried the weight of a trial. Claire lunged forward, her voice breaking. "You're twisting things. You've always been jealous." "No," I cut in calmly. "I was surviving. While you burned money on spas, I paid the bills. While you were praised as brilliant, I was your safety net. And now everyone sees the truth." My father's face reddened. "You ungrateful child. After everything we've done—" "Everything you've done?" I echoed, my voice steady. "You mean everything I've paid for? Everything you took?" A murmur ran through the room. Some guests shook their heads. Others whispered behind hands. The cracks in my parents' perfect mask were widening by the second. And then Lily, my cousin, sharp-eyed, never one to mince words, stood up from her chair. "She's right," Lily said firmly, her voice carrying across the hall. "I've seen it for years. Claire was pampered and she was used. Enough pretending." The energy shifted like a wave crashing. Heads turned. Suddenly, I wasn't standing alone. Claire stumbled back, pale. My parents' faces collapsed, their voices caught in their throats. The fortress of lies they had built for decades crumbled in front of an audience. I gathered the papers slowly, calmly, my voice low but sharp enough to slice the silence. "You always told me I wasn't enough. Tonight I proved you wrong. And the room, every pair of eyes, every hushed voice knew it was true. The hall that once rang with clinking glasses now felt like a tomb. The chandeliers still glittered, but the shine couldn't cover the cracks that had split wide open. My parents sat slumped at the head table, their perfect posture gone, their faces pale. For decades, they had clung to Claire's brilliance like armor. But tonight, the armor lay shattered at their feet. Claire had stormed out minutes earlier, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. The echo still lingered, as if the walls themselves refused to let her exit be forgotten. She had shouted something about betrayal, about me being nothing. But the truth had already taken root. No amount of screaming could erase what everyone had just witnessed. The guests shifted uneasily, avoiding my parents' gaze. A few whispered to each other, their eyes darting toward me, then back to the door Claire had slammed behind her. Nobody wanted to openly side with my family anymore. They had built their empire on the illusion of perfection. And people love to watch illusions crumble. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass, but she didn't drink. My father kept opening his mouth as though to speak, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in my life, they looked small. Not the towering figures who had commanded and dismissed me at every turn, but two broken people caught in their own web of lies. I should have felt triumphant. I should have been laughing inside, celebrating that the mighty had fallen. But what washed over me instead was calm, a strange, steady calm that settled deep in my chest. I thought back to all the years of invisibility, birthdays forgotten, achievements brushed aside, the countless nights crying into a pillow, wondering why I was never enough. And now, in this moment, I realized I didn't need them to see me anymore. The world had seen. I had seen. That was enough. Relatives lingered in tight clusters, whispering. Aunt Margaret, the one who had once smirked and called me ordinary, kept her head down, avoiding my eyes. Even she had nothing to say now. The silence of my critics was louder than any applause. I walked toward the window, looking out at the city lights glowing beyond the glass. For so long, my world had been contained in the four walls of their judgment. Tonight, I felt the walls collapse. Beyond them stretched something bigger, a life where I wasn't defined by their cruelty. Behind me, the murmur of shame pressed harder on my parents. I didn't have to add another word. Their collapse was already complete. I drew a deep breath, my reflection faint against the window pane. For years, bitterness had been my companion. But tonight, calmness replaced it. Not forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that. But peace, the kind that comes when the truth finally speaks louder than lies. I turned back, meeting the eyes of the few guests who dared to look at me. Some nodded, subtle but sure. They had witnessed the fall of a false empire, and they recognized the strength it had taken to pull it down. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood there, steady as the storm quieted. Because for once, the chaos wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs, and I was finally free from it. The morning after felt different. The mansion that had once been a stage for their cruelty now stood quiet, stripped of its power over me. I packed my bag slowly, leaving behind nothing but the weight they had forced me to carry for years. When I stepped outside, Daniel was there, leaning against his car. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. His steady presence had always been enough. "You ready?" he asked softly. I looked back at the house one last time, the place where I had been mocked, silenced, erased. The place where I had been forced to pay bills and still be called ungrateful. It loomed behind me, but for the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a cage I had already unlocked. I nodded. More than ready. We started down the driveway together, the gravel crunching under our shoes. Each step felt lighter, as if invisible chains were breaking with every movement. Daniel glanced at me. "Most people would have folded. What you did last night." That took courage. I let out a slow breath. Justice doesn't always come in courts. It comes in truth. The words left my mouth with a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For years, I had craved justice, imagined dramatic court cases, public apologies, or some grand gesture of acknowledgement. But the truth had been simpler. Justice was speaking my story aloud, refusing to let them bury me in silence any longer. Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes warm with pride. And now they'll never forget it. We reached the end of the driveway, the house shrinking behind us. I didn't look back again. My life was no longer tied to those walls, those expectations, those wounds. I had carried their betrayal long enough. Now, I carried only myself. As we drove away, the city opened up before me. Lights flickered, streets stretched wide, and the horizon felt infinite. For once, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I thought about the journals I had filled with pain, each page soaked in humiliation and anger. Maybe now, those pages could hold something else. Hope, freedom, possibility. Daniel reached over, his hand brushing mine briefly. So what now? I stared out the window, the future unfolding in the blur of passing lights. Now I live. On my terms. A weight lifted, heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I wasn't the maid of the family, the bank, the scapegoat. I was simply me, and that was enough. As the car rolled forward, I whispered to myself, not out of bitterness, but with quiet certainty. They don't own my story anymore. I do. The world outside felt new. And so did I. There's a silence that comes after a storm. Not the heavy kind, not the suffocating kind, but the silence that feels like the world is breathing again. That's the silence I found myself in after everything. After the truth, after the chaos, after walking away. I used to think family was a guarantee, that blood meant loyalty, that shared names meant shared hearts. But I learned the hard way that family isn't always blood. Sometimes blood is the sharpest knife you'll ever face. When I look back now, I don't just see the betrayal. I see the girl who swept floors while her sister was praised. I see the teenager who worked nights and still heard ordinary at every turn. I see the young adult called the maid, the bank, the nothing. That girl carried scars that no one cared to notice, but those scars became my map, guiding me towards something greater than the approval I once begged for. It's strange how betrayal, the thing I thought would break me, actually forged me. Every cruel laugh, every dismissal, every slap of words or silence, they were all hammer strikes against iron, and iron, under enough fire, doesn't shatter. It becomes steel. I think about Daniel, walking beside me, proving with his steady presence that family can be chosen. I think about Lily, the cousin who stood up when no one else dared to. Those moments remind me that love doesn't need a title or a bloodline. It only needs truth. For years, I thought strength meant silence. Enduring, surviving, pretending it didn't hurt. But strength is louder than that. Strength is stepping into the fire and refusing to burn. Strength is saying the words they never expected you to say. Strength is refusing to carry their shame anymore. The mansion behind me, the people who lived in it, the pedestal they had built for Claire, all of it feels like a faded photograph now. Once it was the center of my world. Now it's nothing more than a shadow in my rearview mirror. I walk through the city streets now with lighter steps. Not because life is suddenly easy. It isn't. But because I know who I am without their definitions. I'm not invisible. I'm not ordinary. I'm not their maid, their scapegoat, or their bank. I'm me. And that is enough. Sometimes at night, I sit by my window with my journal in my lap. The pages that once held only pain now hold something new. Words of hope. Words of gratitude. Words of freedom. I write not to prove I exist, but because I finally know that I do. When people ask me about family now, I don't tell them about bloodlines or holidays or last names. I tell them family is the friend who waits for you outside the house you finally leave. Family is the cousin who risks ridicule to stand by your side. Family is the truth that stays, even when lies crumble. And betrayal? Betrayal was the cruelest teacher, but it taught me the most important lesson of all, that I never needed their validation to be whole. I used to whisper into the darkness, asking why I wasn't enough. Now, I whisper something different, something brighter, something truer. They once told me I wasn't enough. Today, I am more than they'll ever be.